Welcome back, honors. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Sounds a little bit ridiculous because this is your very first flip of the year. I know, we're running it back, we're starting all over again, but I just want to go ahead and say it was so nice meeting y'all today. It was really a lot of fun. I don't remember a single one of y'all's names, which is really embarrassing, but it's going to be okay because we're going to get them figured out and stuff like that. I know there's some Emmas running around in there like we have all over this school and stuff like that, so I'll probably drop a couple of like random little names along the way and stuff like that. But anyway, we are going to pick up right where we left off in class today because we started off in class talking about like defining Western civilizations and talking about how like we're talking about West not as so much in the direction, but we're talking about it more as a cultural sense. This is much more of a European history class than an ancient civs class to discuss the foundations, the growth into the modern era of which we now currently live in this country and things like that. We talked about some of the hypocrisies about the Western civilizations, we talked about things that define Western civilizations, but we left off in class talking about the very beginning of human history, right? We started talking off about like human history in totality. Now the thing to focus on when we're talking about human history in totality is to know of what human beings are, right? We got to actually describe what is a human being? Where are we going with this? Who are we actually talking about this in general? And now, like, also, you know, just in generality, and speaking of human beings and human society growing forward out of what we believe to be very ancient, very early roots, right? So the thing about it, though, in general, is we often start off human history by talking about the rise of what's known as hominids, right? So, like, the rise of hominids in general is going to be very important because it's actually discussing the talk and the growth of very intrinsic ideas about human beings and their earliest relatives, right? So we're talking about the spread all over the world through migration and settlement and things like that, right? So the biggest thing you need to know about like hominids is what we use to describe that. A hominid is basically humans and their earliest relatives, right? And these humans and their earliest relatives are going to originate in the continent that we now know as Africa, anywhere from between 2 to 6 million years ago, right? So about 2 to 6 million years ago, you're going to see the growth of these creatures that are going to be very ape-like in a sense, and we are going to continue to evolve forward into the human beings that you know of today, which of course is very important because it's actually a Catholic teaching now as well, is that teaching along with the ideas of evolution is the answer to how, not necessarily the answer to why not, right? So going forward though, a lot of it's also going to be keyed in right here on this concept right here. Africa, right? We believe that all human beings originate out of the continent of Africa, that the very first hominids are going to evolve in Africa, and then they're going to begin to spread all over the world through migration and settlement. Now, some of the very earliest records of like different ancient species of human beings and stuff like that is like this one right here. That right there is the skull of who is commonly known as Lucy, right? Lucy being a piece of a skull of what we believe to be an Australopithecus ancestor of human beings in the modern era. We believe that she would have been much shorter, that she would have actually not had like linguistic abilities and things like that, had a smaller brain, but we also believe though that she shared a lot of very intrinsically human ideas and are the beginning of human beings, right? And the thing you need to understand though is in the grand scheme of things, hominids are so young and human beings are so young in the comparison and the growth of modern day humans into modern day historic society, right? The Earth, just to give you a perspective, is 4.5 billion years old, right? That is bananas. It's so big that it's hard to comprehend, right? It's really difficult to comprehend how old something can, like how old the thing that we're sitting on right now actually can be. 4.5 billion years. So I always use this like image of a football field, right? It's a common like historical tool that a lot of historians use to describe the limited amount of time that human beings have even existed on this planet, right? So when we're looking at a football field as if this is the history of the planet in totality, and by the way, if you don't like it, by the way, not a Saints fan, actually a Philadelphia Eagles fan, so go Birds all day. Now look, so the biggest thing about it though in general is if you looked at not human history, but the history of the planet as a football field, if this 100 yards right here represented the 4.5 billion years that human beings have existed on the planet Earth, how much of this football field would be taken up by human history? Right? Some of you are like, oh, maybe the 40-yard line on this side is where human beings popped up. Or wait, no, maybe over here. Nope. You're all wrong. It's crazy. The only amount of time that human beings have existed on this football field, as if it's the history of the totality of the planet, is the last line of blades of grass right here before the following end zone. That is crazy when you think about it, right? That human beings are such a small fraction of time when it comes to the entire continuity and history of the Earth. But we're also the only ones that are recording anything. So we also are always going to talk about modern humans and how, yeah, maybe they've only existed for about 200,000 years, but hey, we're the ones that are actually recording all the ridiculous historical developments that are going on throughout the progression of history. Now, when you're looking at a lot of different things about like human beings in general and stuff like that, humans have gone through many different iterations, right? And what I mean by that is we have like actually evolved from many different earlier forms of human beings and things like that. So you do not need to write these down. You are not going to be expected to know these different things going forward and stuff like that about human beings and their earliest ancestors and stuff. It's just to show you and demonstrate to you that we have actually grown out of more primitive beings, right? And so when the split from ape to actually man was started, we like believe that our earliest relatives were known as Australopithecus, right? Which is what Lucy herself would have been, right? As you can see, she did not quite walk upright. She did not possess the capability of language, but she was beginning to bring on some very human characteristics as her body began to tilt upright and move towards bipedal movement, right? And then we moved forward into Homo habilis, which is going to begin to use like tools and simple tools and things like that. Homo erectus, who is going to stand completely upright. And then we're going to eventually end up with Homo sapiens, which includes Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, and the modern man, right? Homo sapien includes like some of our earliest relatives that many people often like actually describe as like cave people and stuff, which ironically enough is the only one that actually ever lived inside of a cave, we believe, would have been the Cro-Magnons, and also just because we have some artifacts inside of caves from like primitive drawings and things like that. But the big thing about it though is we are what's known specifically as Homo sapiens sapiens, right? And the only reason I bring that up is because actually Homo sapien includes Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon, Homo sapien adultu, and then Homo sapiens sapiens, which is the very, very specific subspecies of human beings that we are today, right? But nobody in science ever really asks about, says oh, we're actually Homo sapiens sapiens. Everybody just says Homo sapien. So Homo sapien is the current version of man that you actually see in front of you, like making this goofy little flip and stuff like that. Now, going forward, though, you have to also understand that so early human history can be separated into two very early on phases, right? So when we're talking about the history of human beings, we break it down into two succinct time periods, right? Not succinct, actually. They're very broad time periods. So I take that back. Two broad time periods that we use to describe human history. The first one being Paleolithic, and the second one being Neolithic, right? So the biggest thing about it is we're going to start off when we're looking at the progression of human history with the Paleolithic, right? Which is the much older version. So the thing about it is we believe that the Paleolithic period started about 2.5 million years ago, so give or take about 10,000 BC, right? So when we're looking again, remember, these are the historical time periods of human beings, right? So Paleolithic people are going to be living in a very certain way that contrasts heavily against the other people we're going to talk about here in 2 seconds, and is the Neolithic populations, right? So the thing that you need to understand primarily about Paleolithic people is that they were nomadic hunters and gatherers, right? So nomadic means that they actually had to move around constantly to find their food or be able to sustain themselves, right? So for example, when something they were hunting would migrate, they would migrate with it, right? Whenever they would actually farm out or gather out a certain area, they would move their encampments. So nomadic humans lived in small family groups where there was a very distinct gender division of labor, where we believe that hunter-gatherer societies, that the men would oftentimes be in hunting parties and women would oftentimes be in gathering groups, right? And men, as hunters, would be responsible for taking down animals and bringing them back, and women would be responsible for gathering, making medicine, raising children, and things like that, right? And we also believe that the earliest forms of Paleolithic people would have been living in a society that would be much more equal to what we actually compare it to now. When I say equal, I mean gender equality, right? As in, men had a specific role that if they didn't do, the community would die, and then women had a specific role that if they didn't do, the community would die. So literally, they kind of were on equal footing. Some early Paleolithic cultures were even matrilineal rather than being patrilineal. Women could sometimes be leaders, we believe, and things like that. So this is also, though, going to lead to the origin of language, complex tools, religion, art, and migration, right? So knowing this and understanding it is that some of the most essential things about being human are going to start in the Paleolithic period. For example, language. What I'm using to speak to you in this moment, in this time, on this flip, is a form of our language, right? And we believe language actually came from hunting parties, right? That men would actually be on these hunting parties and they would need to be able to communicate with each other to be able to take down an animal in a distance. They had to be able to actually start with nonverbal signals, pointing at things, saying, this is where we're going. They began then later on to assign words to things like that. And so the origin of language is a very important thing that's going to happen during the Paleolithic period. Complex tools are going to begin to come out of this time period as well. Things like spears, throwing items, also like tools like knives and other cutting utensils. Religion is going to be a big one as well, and you might need to jot this down. We believe that Paleolithic religion started mostly due to this, right? We believe that religion began in Paleolithic time periods mostly due to the fact that we have discovered evidence of dead bodies that have been buried with great care, right? Paleolithic people would oftentimes bury their dead, giving us an idea that they believed death, that they acknowledged death, and that they believed that the body must be kept safe for one reason or another, which shows the elements of a very, 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 very non-complex or primitive religion possibly at the time, but we do believe that the evidence of burying the dead is going to help lead to growth of religions and the planes and the ideas of an afterlife and stuff like that. So Paleolithic people would actually bury the dead to keep them away from scavengers or other animals that might try to eat the body and stuff like that, and oftentimes they would be buried with precious items with them, like things like jewelry or things they had collected or things that they had made and things like that. So another thing as well is you're going to see art. You're going to see some of the earliest drawings and paintings pop up on cave walls. This one is actually from the south of France. And then also you're going to see migration, right? Migration is going to be very, very key, and Paleolithic people are going to begin to spread all over the world, right? And they're going to start in Africa, move all the way throughout Europe, go all the way through Asia, and eventually end up in North and South America more recently, right? So and of course that is a big reason why possibly that Native Americans, when Europeans showed up, were not as advanced as the Europeans were, because they had actually literally were several hundred years behind, right? So now the biggest thing going into it as well is this is that out of Africa theory, right? Here is Africa, and then as you can see, the earliest human beings are going to evolve and then begin to move their way throughout all of these different areas. And there was actually a frozen bridge right here that connected Russia to Alaska, and people began to move into the Americas as well. Now, the second time period, as opposed to Paleolithic, is the Neolithic period, right? Neolithic is going to be about 10,000 BC to the present, and it's going to mainly encompass a very dramatic shift in how human beings operated, right? Now, what possibly could have been such a big deal that would need us to quantify these things a little bit differently? By the way, when we go backwards really quick, Paleolithic, to break the word down specifically, literally means Old Stone Age. Paleo meaning old, kind of like when we say paleo diet, the old way of eating, right? Paleo means old. Lithic means stone or Stone Age, right? So the Old Stone Age then moves and transitions into the New Stone Age, Neolithic. But what could have happened so monumentously that would have created a dramatic shift in the type of communities that were created by human beings and would have led to the first writing systems, to the first civilizations? What could be so big? The invention of farming, all right? The invention of farming. Some of you are like, really? Farming? That doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. Farming is a massively important actual origin in human history, because they're going to begin to become sedentary, right? Now, sedentary here is very important to understand. Sedentary means they're not going to move around as much, right? They're going to begin to create cities and villages and towns and little concentrations of human beings to farm surpluses and keep each other safe, right? And there were massive benefits early on to this Neolithic agricultural revolution known as farming. And it's also, by the way, jot this down, the Neolithic agricultural revolution is what this is called, okay? The Neolithic agricultural revolution, all right? So looking at this, though, that you have to understand is that there are huge benefits to this. You're going to see animal and plant domestication. Some of you are like, how do you domesticate a plant? Do I have to take it on walks? No, but we will talk about that tomorrow, actually, when I see y'all tomorrow, A period. Animal and plant domestication is going to be very important, though. We are going to talk about which one came first. There's a very, very large argument in a lot of different communities, but we believe plant domestication came first. And then, so another thing is you're going to see surpluses, right? What is a surplus, right? When we're talking about a surplus of agricultural goods, it means we're farming more than enough to get us through the winter or the seasons of which we do not farm in, right? We're farming enough grains and crops and things like that so we can begin to sustain ourselves during periods where we need to stay alive during harsh conditions, seasons, winters, things like that. Surpluses are massively important as well because it's going to lead to this right here, job specialization. Because if, for example, like we got Ape here, and there's only like a 15 of y'all, right? The zombie apocalypse happens, and we got to start an agricultural community somewhere. Let's say, hypothetically, one of our girls, Emma, is going to start farming, right? And she farms more than enough for all of us to eat. Well, we're not all just going to sit around on our thumbs all day and do nothing. We're going to specialize in a job to contribute to the community, right? So these surpluses in agricultural things led to the creation of different jobs within the communities, right? And we oftentimes refer to those people as artisans, right? So artisan is spelled A-R-T-I-S-A-N-S, artisans, right? And artisans would do different things like potters who would make pots and things like that. People who would actually make tools and weaponry. People that were actually still hunters. People that actually did a lot of different things. Priests is going to be a big thing as well. So job specialization is going to, weavers and people like that are going to come along. It's going to be very important, right? And then you're going to see also trade is going to begin, right? They're going to start making so much stuff and farming so much stuff that they're going to use some of these surpluses to trade with other communities that are going to pop up when they learn how to farm, right? Like, for example, Sumeria, which we'll talk about tomorrow as well, is going to be very important, is going to trade with earlier renditions of places like Ur and Babylon, right? So like when you farm enough stuff and you make enough stuff using job specialization, you can trade those items with other communities that are popping up as well. And a big one that you need to highlight is writing, right? Farming is going to lead to writing because the earliest forms of written language were used to keep account of farmed goods so they could actually make sure they had enough to get them through those harsh seasons that they needed to get through, right? So also, though, here's a big thing. There's a very, very famous evolutionary biologist / historian named Jared Diamond who says that the invention of farming was the worst mistake in human history, right? So like that in the history of the planet, nothing was worse than human beings learning how to farm, right? Reason why he says this is because of all the negatives that came along with the farming like concept. Because there are going to be a lot of them, right? Social classes are going to pop up. We are now going to have people that are very, very wealthy, people that are very, very poor, right? Also, gender inequality, because remember, gathering and plant taking and plant gathering and medicine making was typically done in Paleolithic communities by women. And farming took that job away from them, right? And it made it so men were now out there farming and other men had job specialization, which left women more sedentary and in a role in society that was pushed into the back, right? Poorer nutrition is going to be another one as well. Diets became less well-rounded and based much more in grains and things like that and carbohydrates rather than being in certain proteins and antioxidant-producing vegetables and other berries and other things that they could be like actually naturally harvested, right? Viruses and diseases, though, is going to be a big one as well. This is going to be one that I talk a lot about tomorrow in class, how viruses actually, we believe, came from animals and then eventually jumped onto human beings, and then we were dealing with viruses that could kill you at the drop of a hat, right? Now, but we'll talk about that stuff and get a little bit more in depth with it tomorrow and all these other little things, but let's chat about civilizations as well, because farming is going to lead to the earliest villages and towns that would then later on grow into what we know as civilizations, right? Civilizations, the word itself, comes from the Latin root civ, right? We see this in Latin words such as civis, which means citizen, and civitas, which means city. But a civilization is literally a collectivized community of those citizens and a city into a major area, right? Civilizations include places like Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, Assyria, Phoenicia, the Hebrews. We will talk a lot about all those guys in this unit, right? And civilizations we believe began to grow around 5,000 years ago, when surplus providing farms became very, very large, right? And they began to actually provide enough food to sustain populations for a very long period of time, right? So going into it, though, and understanding all this stuff is very, very important, right? Because civilizations first originated, ironically enough, in arid regions next to bodies of water. Now, the thing about it is, like, you got the Middle East, Egypt, Southeast China, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Mexico are going to be some of the biggest areas where they're going to actually start some of the earliest civilizations. In the Middle East and in the Near East, you're going to see places, or Southwest Asia is what it's referred to as. You're going to see Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. You're going to see their growth. Southeast China, you're going to see some of the earliest settlements in China as well. Sub-Saharan Africa is areas below the Sahara, which are going to be near the Niger and Congo rivers, right? Now, what did I just say, though? Rivers. River valley civilizations become a massively important thing, and almost every ancient society was settled next to a river, right? So jot that down. All these guys right here were settled next to main bodies of water, mostly rivers. They extracted food from arid regions and demanded social cohesion and cooperation, right? To stay alive in these areas, they had to cooperate with one another, live in these river valley associations, and create jobs and specialized things to keep everyone alive, right? Cooperation is going to lead to specialized jobs, governments, and sophisticated religion. Now, just to give you a heads up, we got no idea what came first. Government or religion? We're not really sure, right? But we do know that governments were necessary to keep the entire progress of society going forward, right? The governments would actually come in to try and help regulate how much was grown, how much was donated to the religions, how much was being used for sacrificial purposes and things like that. And religion is going to come in to try and give answers to things because they didn't have science to use for those answers, right? For example, why did this happen? Why did all of our crops die? Religion comes in to try and give you an answer to that question early on, right? So like you're going to see the growth of all those early civilizations have specific religions and specialized jobs and things like that going forward, right? Now, all civilizations share the same 6 characteristics, right? When you're talking about the characteristics of a civilization, there are 6 things that kind of make them stand out as being like a checklist of civilization things, right? And what they are is 1, concentration, right? You have a group of people living in the same area, right? 2, distinct religious structure, which we talked about just 2 seconds ago. So, like, if you're a little aggravated that I made you right twice, I don't really care. So religious structure is going to be a big thing. There were no atheistic early civilizations and stuff like that. What you're going to see is actually the growth of religious structures that are going to be very, very polytheistic early on as opposed to monotheistic. And we'll talk a lot about the delineation between those two things a little bit later on. Political and military structure as well is going to be a big thing as well. And what I mean by political and military structure is you're going to have armies or a way to defend yourself from other civilizations if they want to come and try and take your stuff. And then you're also going to have a political situation where you're going to have a bureaucracy, right? A bureaucracy is like a multi-level government to make it so you can collect taxes, make sure farms are farming enough, and things like that. You're going to see the growth of social classes, which is unfortunate. Why do we have to have social classes? Don't ask me. But then also you're going to see another big one, writing and record keeping is going to be a big, big thing of civilizations. And here's my favorite one, artistic and intellectual activity. Like, what's the point of living together if we can't make some art and stuff like that? As you can see from looking all over my room, I love art. Art's a big fan of art. Like, especially these two behind me. That's Man with Guitar by Picasso during his Blue Period, and this is by Jacques-Louis David. It's The Death of Marat. So, like, now the big thing about it, though, is you're going to see the growth of those different ideas. And the first civilizations we will analyze is going to be in an area known as Mesopotamia. You probably learned it when you were younger as the Fertile Crescent, and some of y'all are going to come in and be like, Tigris and Euphrates River! Calm down, but we'll talk about that the next time I see you tomorrow. So y'all have a good one. I'll see y'all then.